Hare Krishna, very dear devotees, welcome back once again to our ongoing series on the glories of our beloved Shri Vrindavan Dham. As you know, we're doing this every Friday now through the summer months. At the present moment, I'm on the Baltic Sea coast in Poland. We're just about to start our summer festival tour called the Festival of India. This will be the 31st year. We're actually planning 50 festivals, so bit of a challenge, but do keep us in your prayers, please. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Shatarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So, we're continuing with our mini-series on historical Vrindavan, and this will be part 8. As you know, previously we discussed different aspects of historical Vrindavan, the old and ancient architecture of Braj, the dressing style of the residents, their food, their cuisine. We also discussed the original form of Vrindavan and its kunjas and nikunjas. And we discussed the writing style and techniques of writing the scriptures in Vrindavan in the old days, as well as different cultural festivals, traditions, social gatherings, etc. So today, in this lecture, I would like to speak about the languages spoken in the old days of Vrindavan. It's actually really interesting. In India, they often say that there's a different language after every krosh. A krosh is 4 miles. So in India they say there's a different language every 4 miles. And I've actually experienced that in my travels in India. But it's a little different in Braj. Braj is big. The whole of Braj Mandala is quite extensive, and we're speaking really about 108 primary villages. But as we've discussed before, there's, sub-villages and sub-sub-villages and sub-sub-villages. But historically, the language in all these villages and all of Braj Mandala is pretty much the same. It's called Braj Bhasa. Sometimes I quote verses in Braj Bhasa from the poets. However, there are slight changes in every village. How is that? In the people's accent, their style of speaking Braj Bhasa, how they pronounce the words. And I was reading that in the old days, Brajbasis used to know someone's village name even without asking someone for it. They would just listen to that person that from a particular village in Brajbasa. They just listened to his accent. And by the accent, they knew, oh, you come from that village, your accent is such, you're from that village, you're from that village. There's not a language, different language every 4 miles. Just a little bit of a different accent. And whatever the accent is, the Brajavasis are very proud of their language because within it are words and terms for glorifying their beloved Lord Krishna. There's a lot of bhav, a lot of rasa, a lot of nectar in Brajavasa. I was reading actually that Vrindavan's scholars say that the success of any language is in its ability to glorify the Lord and His pastimes. That's Brajbasa, it's pregnant with all these words and terms you can glorify Radha and Krishna. Of course, Brajbasi scholars are very proficient in Sanskrit. They can read and write Sanskrit, which is the language of the Vedas. And we know that most of the works of our 6 Goswamis were written in Sanskrit. But later, for ease of understanding, the deep meanings of those Sanskrit texts were brought forth by the medieval poets of Braja. They translated the dramas, the scriptures, and prayers from Sanskrit into Brajbasa. The works of the Goswamis, there's the Sanskrit, they turned it into Brajbasa. And in due course of time, scholarly devotees in Bengal, like our hero, Narottam Das Thakur, also started translating Sanskrit texts into Bengali in such a way that even simple people could understand their meaning. They took the Sanskrit and translated it into Bengali. And actually, when Bengali devotees and scholars like Narottam Das Thakur, Shyamananda Pandit, Srinivas, Krishnadas Brahmachari and others came to reside in Vrindavan for some time, as devotees would do, those acharyas, they introduced a new language to the world, which is a mixture of Bengali and Brajbhasa. And it's known as Brajbuli, the Brajbuli language. Braj, of course, refers to Brajbhasa, and Buli refers to the Bengali language. Now this Brajbuli, this language, it actually shows the ingenuity of such acharyas because they combine two commonly spoken languages into a simple language, thus giving everybody an opportunity to read the scriptures. Therefore, it's safe to say that our acharyas were revolutionary in their preaching methods. As we know, our Srila Prabhupada was so expert in revolutionizing the preaching in Krishna consciousness in the Western countries. Now, Brajbuli was a language very much favored by Srila Narottam Das Thakur. In fact, all of his writings are in the Brajbuli language. Thus, his works are popular both in Vrindavan and Bengal as well. Now, getting back to just Brajbhasa, as it is spoken today in Vrindavan, in the olden days in Vrindavan, sadhus used to come to Vrindavan just to learn Brajbhasa. Just like scholars used to go to Benares in ancient days to learn the Sanskrit language and its literature. Devotees would come because, again, in that Brajbhasa language, there's so many ways to understand and to glorify Krishna. I think we should have a course in ISKCON in Brajbhasa. And there's a big list of names of famous poets who wrote in Brajbhasa. Many of them I've quoted in the last year or so. For example, remember the Muslim devotee, Rasa Khan? The other devotee, Taj Biwi? Gadadhar Bhatt Goswami, he was from South India, but he wrote in Brajbhasa. Rasikotam, we quoted him. And there's actually 8, or you could say the 8 famous poets of Braj. They also wrote in Brajbhasa. Who are they? Surdas, Parmanandas, Kumbhandas, Chaturbhuj Das, Nanda Das, Krishna Das, Chit Goswami, and a poet named Govinda Swami. Also, we've quoted many poets like Kishore Das, Lalit Kishore, and Krishna Kavi. We've quoted their verses in Brajbhasa. So many devotees. And interestingly, there are many, many documents in the Vrindavan Research Institute which are written in Brajbhasa. When I was there a few months ago, I saw in that institute the actual final will and testament of Jiva Goswami. It was written, or rather you could say he spoke it on his deathbed, and the scribes wrote it down mainly in Sanskrit, but I was pleased to also see there were many words in Brajbhasa. And I also saw many documents related to the Radha Damodar temple written in the time of Jiva Goswami that were also in Brajbhasa. And one really interesting thing I found, there's a very famous set of prayers in the Institute. They're known as the Apology Prayer Letters. And they're known as Kshama Pratna Patra. Kshama Pratna Patra. And they were letters that were written by various Brajbasis, devotees, or servants, different Vaishnavas who had misbehaved. They'd made a mistake or they made an offense. And they wrote these letters to apologize to Jiva Goswami and other acharyas at that time. What did they write? Please give me another chance. Please don't kick me out of Vrindavan. I'm repenting. I made a mistake. Please don't kick me out. They're called the apology letters. And I noticed that at the end of their letters, they all made one statement in Braj Bhasa. Shri Gosaiji se or, Shri Vrindavan se dur, which means, if I repeat my mistake again, then I will have to be very far from Shri Rupa Goswami and Shri Vrindavan. Please let me stay. They couldn't bear the separation. So the glories of Braj Bhasa and its poetic nature is well known to us. We've discussed it many times, actually, in the last few months. And therefore, I was very pleased to find a stanza written by a poet named Garib Das, G-A-R-I-B, Garib Das, who, in his glorification of Vrindavan in general, he also mentions the Braj Bhasa language. And I think it's going to become one of my favorite shlokas. Listen to this. The abode of Braj, the food of the Braj Basis, the dust of Braj, the kunjas of Braj, the company of the Brajabasis, and the words of Braj Bhasa are the 5 life heirs of those who are dear devotees of Srimati Radharani. The abode of Braj, the food of the Braj Basis, the dust of Braj, the kunjas of Braj, the company of the Braj Basis, and the words of Braj Bhasa are the 5 life heirs of those who are dear devotees of Srimati Radharani. Let them also be our 5 life heirs. Another poet, Paramanandas, who we mentioned earlier, he also wrote about the glories of Braj Bhasa. He writes, all glories to the Lord of sound and words, Lord Vagadesha, meaning Krishna, who is the source of all knowledge and powers. But the glories of Lord Vagadesha, Krishna, is less than the glories of Mother Yasoda, who is teaching her baby Krishna how to speak the first letters of the alphabet of the glorious Braj Bhasa language. Pure nectar. We thank that poet. He continues, all glories to the language of Braj, which is coming from the lotus mouth of the Lord of the universe in such a way that it attracts and intoxicates the ears and minds of his devotees. All glories to the language of Braj, to its Dwani sound, its Anudwani, vibrations, and to its Pratidwani, its reverberations in that great Braj Bhasa language. These poets are sharing such deep realizations with us. So such were the words written by these poets of Braj in glorification of Braj Bhasa. Now another interesting thing, like really interesting, is that I also read that the great emperor of India, of course there's many emperors, but we favor one, Akbar. Remember we talked extensively about Akbar. He was actually a very big fan of Braj Bhasa. His court poet and singer, that famous singer, remember, Pandit Tansen, he used to only sing in the Braj Bhasa language, not any other language. Why? Because he'd learned it from the singing of Haridas Swami, a very famous Vaishnavacharya, who used to live in Vrindavan at Nidhivan. Akbar loved Brajabhasa so much that just to hear beautiful poems sung in Brajbhasa, he would sometimes come to Vrindavan disguised as an ordinary man to sit and hear the singing and poems in Brajbhasa sung by Haridas Swami himself, the emperor. And I was reading that in old Vrindavan, men and women, what was the entertainment in the evening? They used to just sit outside their homes and sing all these poems in the Brajbhasa language and dance in ecstasy. That is the entertainment of Brajbasis, and we want to become Brajbasis. There was no TV, there was no internet, there were no mobile phones. I just flew from Cyprus to Berlin yesterday, actually. And nowadays there's a facility you can go on the internet, log on to the internet on the flights. And I was actually continuing a little research for this class, and I looked around. Everybody had their mobile phones on. They're watching cartoons and the news and movies and things. No. Sing the poems of all these great devotees in the Brajabhasa language and remember Krishna. So Brajabhasa was everything for a Brajabasi. And it's said that once you understand it, you have a chance to dive deep down into the sweet ocean of Krishna's pastimes. And while I was researching, I was curious to know or to learn what language Krishna spoke. What were the different, was there just one language or several languages that Krishna spoke with the residents in Vrindavan 5,000 years ago? I never heard anything about it. And actually I found out that Krishna spoke several dialects in Braj. And how did I find out? By reading Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Rather, I had someone translate for me the original Sanskrit. And we came across a verse, 2.165. Vividhar bhuta bhasavit saprokta yastu kovida nandadeshasu ba'asho samskrite prakriteshucha. He who is expert in the dialects of various regions, Sanskrit and Prakrit, and the languages of birds and beasts, is known as Vividhat Bhuta Bhashavit, the knower of many amazing languages, and that is our Krishna. A little research showed me that the Prakrit language referred to therein is actually a group of languages, including Ardha Magadhi, Maharastri, and Suryaseni, etc. Now these languages were spoken in Dwapara Yuga. And with a few exceptions, they're no longer spoken now. But the next verse in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is really interesting because Rupa Goswami goes on to say, and now we know what Krishna spoke. He writes, with the ladies and the residents in general of Braj, Krishna speaks Shurasheni, a part of the Prakrit language. With Indra, who bows his head down, Krishna elaborately speaks Sanskrit language. And with the Kashmiris, who Rupa at that time refers to as tribals, and the birds and beasts of Vrindavan, he speaks the Prakrit language, named specifically Aparamsha. Aparamsha. That's how Krishna speaks to the birds and the beasts. Rupa Goswami is writing it there in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Aparamsha. Then he concludes, Rupa concludes, how did this little Krishna become such an expert in all these languages? How did this little Krishna become such an expert in all these languages? So in that second verse, Rupa says that Krishna speaks in the Shurya-Seni language, specifically with Brajbasis. And again, Shurya-Seni is as a part of the Prakrit language. And this Prakrit language was lost over time, but traces of it are still found in the Brajabhasa language that we hear today. So we can understand that Brajabhasa is a version of the Prakrit language from Dwapara Yuga that Krishna spoke in. So I was thinking it's very relishable to know that our Lord Krishna spoke in so many different languages. Actually, he can, obviously, Abhigna Swarat, he's present everywhere, he knows everything. He can speak in any language, making it easier for us as an international society with so many languages to share our hearts with him in our own tongues. You can also pray to Krishna in English and French and German and Russian. One time Prabhupada said that even if you don't pronounce the Sanskrit properly, Krishna's in your heart. He knows what you're trying to say. All glories to our beloved Krishna. So we'll finish today with a special verse. It's not a long verse as we often do to finish our classes. It's short, but it's very, very sweet. Sarvopi Shraddha Rashir Yasmu Dhuri Yaya So Pir Harir Dhuna Radha Nirdesha Vachne Svekam Shabd Meya Janati. Listen to this. That Hari from whom unlimited words in the vocabulary arise, that same Hari only utters the expression, okay, when Sri Radha instructs him. One more time. That Hari from whom unlimited words in the vocabulary arise, that same Hari only utters the expression, okay, when Sri Radha instructs him. Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki jai. So I hope that you enjoyed this lecture, interesting lecture about the different dialects that Krishna speaks and the Brajbasa language in Vrindavan, etc. And I have to run off now. Our very first festival is starting in about an hour and a half, first festival this season, so I have to go, but I'll continue the lecture series somehow or other during these summer months, and I'll be back again next Friday. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shyama ki, Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki, Mayapur Dham ki, Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Krishna Sankirtan Yagya ki, Nitai Gaur Premanandi, Jai Jai Sisi Radhe Sham. High ball.